All right, since I seem to have a little bit of momentum with this, let's keep going. So today I'm going to address why I think epidemiology is crap. Something I've said for, God, years and years and years, and will continue to say. And now I'm going to explain why. So I imagine most listeners heard about the most recent egg study, came out I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, which contradicts the previous egg study, and it was done by Zhong et al. Associations of Dietary Cholesterol, or egg consumption with instant cardiovascular disease and mortality. It was published in Journal of American Medical Association, 2019. And what it purports to have found was that the amount of cholesterol in a bit less than 2 large eggs a day was associated with an increase in a person's risk of cardiovascular disease and death by 17 and 18% respectively. The risk grew with every additional half egg, and it had 30,000 people, right? So that's got to be valid. Well, no, and now I'm going to explain why. So epidemiology is a science. As one researcher, I guess, basically described it as it's a survey. It's basically you ask people a bunch of questions, like about what they eat or where they live or what their lifestyle is. They get them to report that, and then you look at whatever you're looking at, and you see what the results are, and then you correlate everything with everything and see what's related to what. One of the most earliest epidemiological studies, possibly the first one I learned about in this medical history class, and it goes way back, hundreds of years. And in this one given city, found that people living in one part of the city were getting a disease and the other part of the city were not. And as it turned out, each part of the city got its water from one well, one very specific well. So the researchers thought, well, maybe the well water is the issue. And it was, because in the part of the city where people were getting sick, the sewage was running into the water supply. And so they were able to conclude, don't shit in your water. So that's kind of the way this works, right? Look at 2 different groups or a group over time, see what variables might be and see what happens and see if you can find a reason for it. Now this was very simple. Get sick, don't get sick. Water, 2 variables, pretty accurate. In modern research, it's more to that. Here's a typical epidemiological study. First, they will ask you what you eat now, maybe. Or they'll ask you what you ate for the last year, the last 10 years, or last week. And then they'll look at whatever they want to look at, and then they'll try to correlate that. Like some studies will ask you at the beginning of the study, and at the end of the study, and they'll see what happens, and they'll try to correlate it. Now, in this particular egg study, right, they followed 30,000 people over 13 to 30 years. And they asked them what they ate exactly once. Dog hair. The beginning of the study. Now, first off, do you remember what you ate last week? Do you remember what you ate a year ago, 6 months ago, 5 years ago? I don't. Well, I probably do because I eat the same 6 things every day. But by and large, most people don't know. But that's what they're being asked to do on these, basically, these memory food reports, right? Food reporting data is notoriously inaccurate, as we've known for decades. This paper asked them what they ate at the beginning of the study and never again. Now, do you think it's possible? Do you think it's accurate that what they ate now is what they were eating over the next 1 to 3 decades? This is not science. This is absurd. Now, let's assume that the food records were accurate. Well, they're not. Like, let's not assume that because it's nonsense, right? And I found this great criticism is on a website called Undark.org, and I don't know if that's any good or not. I don't care what they really so much had to say, but they quoted some good researchers on this topic. So the first quote, and I wish I could write this well, were by researchers Archer and LeVay. It was in an open letter to the National Academies, published on a site called realclearscience.com, and I'll put all the links in the description and also on my website. They wrote, nutrition is now a degenerating research paradigm in which scientifically illiterate methods, meaningless data, and consensus-driven censorship dominate the empirical landscape. And damn, I wish I could write that well. I truly do. And they, of course, explain some of the reasons, but really a big one is these memory food recall data. That even assuming you do them multiple times, you're assuming that they're accurate, and they're really not. And towards this, in another paper, Archer and co-author Pavella, and the paper is a discussion of the refutation of memory-based dietary assessment methods, the rhetorical defense of pseudoscientific and inadmissible evidence. It's published in Mayo Clinic's Proceeding, 2015. They write Unlike most research findings, the lack of credibility of M-BM data has been replicated consistently over the past 3 decades. And one thing they show is that if you actually take the food records as accurate, most people are reporting calorie intakes that are nearly 50% lower what is required for survival, right? Now we know why. We know that people drastically underreport their food intake. We've known this for 4 decades. Gary Taub still doesn't know it and didn't when he wrote his book, but we've known that people are terrible at this. Lean people do it, overweight people do it, obese people do it, active people do it, inactive people do it, registered dietitians do it, often underreporting their true food intake by up to 50%, which explains this, but it points out that these food recalls are terrible. So if you're taking them at face value, and the foods that are being reported, you're not getting an accurate intake of their protein, their carbs, their fat, their food intake, their micronutrient intake. Because they're underreporting. They're not reporting everything. Let me continue that paragraph. We know of no other data collection tool in any field of actual science that demonstrates a significant decrement in performance each time it is used. Yet that is precisely what was found in the energetic study. Right now, the paper they cite is by Arab et al., which wasn't, and what they did is they gave 8 dietary recalls over a span of about 2 months. Some were in the lab, some were online, I think some got mailed. They were just looking to see, are people willing to go through this, right? They were looking at the feasibility of doing it. But when Archer and Pavella analyzed the data, they found that over the administration of 8 24-hour recalls, Arab et al. Reported a statistically significant decreasing trend for energy, minus 535 calories per day. They varied by macronutrient, protein minus 22 grams per day, fat minus 27 grams per day, carbs minus 54 grams per day. Which what that's saying is that every time these people did the dietary recall, their numbers went down. Every time. It's not a good method. We've known that food recall is a bad method, but this points out just how bad it is. So even if you gave people multiple food recalls over the span of 10 or 30 years or whatever, there's no indication that they're going to be A, accurate in the first place because people don't remember what they ate, or B, that they're not going to change. But that's what epidemiology by and large is based upon, these self-reported food intakes that are meaningless. So, what else can I... and that sort of brings up the other problem, right? Epidemiology. So again, let's assume the food data was accurate, which is probably not. Well, it's not. And you look at a disease, at many number of diseases, and you correlate everything with everything. What you find is that usually the conclusion you reach is being driven by your own personal bias and ideology. For example, vegan and vegetarian researchers always seem to find that animal products are bad for you, and vice versa. The China study is the classic example, and I'm going to link to an article that just does an amazing job of taking it apart. Basically, the researchers looked at a bunch of different provinces in China, heart disease, self-reported food intake, and then basically concluded that dairy foods cause cancer, roughly. And they did this by conveniently ignoring some data that didn't fit, ignoring other things that had a much greater predictive value, and the fact was none of it made a shit's worth of difference because it's a shit science. There's another issue, which has to do with the fact that it is impossible to try to conclude that a single nutrient or single food causes disease, right? Nobody eats a single food on a day. Maybe those carnivore diet idiots, but whatever, right? We eat a diet containing many different macronutrients and micronutrients, and that varies day to day or week to week or year to year as we age, right? To single out one particular food and try to say that that is the problem is absurd, right? And the quote in this Undark article that I will read to you when I can find it, this is a quote from Michael Blaha, cardiologist at Johns Hopkins University, writes, "It is impossible to disentangle the effect of one particular food or one macronutrient from the accompanying foods and macronutrients that characterize a typical dietary pattern," right? We eat more than one food a day. We eat a mix of foods. And frequently that mixture of foods is what you need to pay attention to, because there's another interesting thing you see. People that eat certain foods tend to eat or not eat other foods. For example, people that tend to eat lots of charred fatty meat tend to not eat lots of fruits and vegetables. Is it the charred fatty meat or is it the lack of fruits and vegetables that's a problem? right? And I cited a paper on this in an article called Protein Controversies on my website, and I talked about it in my protein book years ago. By the same token, people who tend to eat leaner cuts of meat frequently do eat lots of fruits and vegetables and less processed carbohydrates. So are we blaming the meat or are we blaming the entire diet, right? You may have seen another paper that the whole backlash against meat and colon cancer may have been misstated, and that's putting it mildly. For a couple reasons. One, they conflated all kinds of meat, whether it was lean chicken, fatty red meat, lean red meat, or processed meat. Everyone was like, meat is bad, especially the vegan and the vegetarian zealots, because they are apparently incapable of realizing that lean chicken breast and fatty charred red meat are not the same thing, right? And what most of the meta-analyses on the meat and cancer thing have found is that it's not so much the presence of the meat, it's the lack of fruits and vegetables. It's the lack of fiber that is causing the colon problems, which, fiber is nature's broom. Another article on my website. So people draw the conclusions that they've already decided are the case. If you dislike meat, you're A, going to conclude that meat is the problem, and B, put all meats in the same category, which is asinine. And it's even funnier because when you do intervention studies, lean red meat improves health. Now, I'm not saying eat processed meat or eat fat. It's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that drawing these conclusions is idiotic, but that's what epidemiology does. We have a broader issue, and that's a complete lifestyle. People who eat certain types of food typically have an overall lifestyle. People that eat charred fatty meats don't eat lots of fruits and vegetables, lots of processed carbs, maybe regular soda. They don't exercise. They're overweight, carrying excess body fat. They may smoke or drink. How can you blame the meat? You have to blame that lifestyle. Like multifactorial, something everyone should have tattooed on their eyelids, because everything is. By the same token, people who eat leaner cuts of meat, lean chicken, like athletes, tend to eat lots of fruits and vegetables, don't really typically drink a lot of soda, eat less processed carbohydrates, they're active, they're lean, typically don't smoke, don't drink, or don't drink excessively. You can't separate the food from the entire picture, but that's what epidemiology attempts to do. And that's why it's crap. So the conclusion of this, and this is a great quote, this comes from Dr. Anthony Pearson, a cardiologist at St. Luke's Hospital in suburban St. Louis. He wrote, rather than drastically cutting egg consumption, and this is on a blog from MedPage Today, I propose there be a drastic cut in the production of weak observational nutrition studies and a moratorium on inflammatory media coverage of meaningless nutritional studies. And again, I wish I could write that well, because all of it is a long-winded saying what I've been saying for over a decade, and so I don't use these papers ever. Epidemiology is crap.